would like to ask about the role of that intersectionality can play in creating change on campus.
Within communities of color, some people are more privileged than others.
Yes.
Non-black students don't have to deal with the level of police brutality that black students have to. Men of color don't have to deal with what women of color have to deal with. Straight people of color don't have to deal with what queer people of color have to deal with. So, but we do see a lot of intersectionality between those, and sometimes the students of color who have better standings in certain institutions can try to lift the burden off of those other people of color that do have more to do with. So maybe y'all can speak about how important it is and maybe how uplifting it's been to have someone at your back who is going out of their way to deal with something that's not something that they directly are affected by.
I don't think there's been too much of an issue with intersectionality. I think sometimes identities can clash and sometimes people are unable to recognize and see their privileges in certain spaces. But I think a really beautiful thing for me with PSC, and especially, I don't know if any of y'all have seen in the past month, there was a Black and Palestinian struggle solidarity video that came out, which is incredible. And those are two movements that have been linked together for a really, really long time, which just shows you how deeply rooted, intersectionality is in movements like this. But I think it's important to show out for other causes because it involves you checking yourself and it involves you acknowledging the space that you have. And the fact of the matter is that, like, when I go to a Black Lives Matter protest, like, I need to be standing in front of a Black body to ensure that police brutality, like, I'm in the, it's a caution,
Thinking about intersectional work, one of the cool parts about having an identity that is continually oppressed is, like, as messed up as it is, like, you're standing in a room with someone, like, any of you, like, that can empathize with you, and, like, no, I will never be able to understand the experience of, like, not inhabiting, like, this particular body. No, I won't. But I know that on some level, like, you understand the pain of, like, just existing every day. Like, it's like one thing to exist and inhabit this body and, like, work through all of these different identities and be a person. And then you take that one step further and you do this work and you listen and you support, and that's something that's completely different. And it's so, so important. And, like, sitting next to the people that I'm sitting next to, or, like, being here, my role is to support. And that's what I'm here for, is not to take up too much space or not to speak too much, but to be a space and to be a voice and to recognize that I do have privilege in lots of areas, even in the areas that I do identify as marginalized or have identities that I feel like are oppressed. Like,
I don't believe that it's ever been above 5%. So what kinds of outreach are we doing now, and what do we need to be doing more to change that?
Let's talk about a historical context here. Okay, so we all know that UT was integrated in 1956, right? We also know that Sweat versus Payne in 1950 was the case that pretty much set in motion Brown versus Board of Education. Like, the idea of identifying that it's separate is inherently unequal really comes from that case, right? So there are a couple of things. I'll take you to my personal experience as a 17-year-old who was considering the University of Texas. And when we talked to other African-American folks about the experience, they were like, well, you're going to play a sport there. I'm like, no, look at me, I'm not going to play sports. And they were like, well, why are you choosing to go to UT? How about going to other schools? And I'm like, well, what's wrong with UT? And then I realized the people I was talking to, their parents, their grandparents could not go to UT, right? Just it wasn't part of it. It was part of your thinking that the University of Texas is not a place for you. My mentor, Charles Willey, who's a professor emeritus at Harvard, is from Dallas. He's from Oak Cliff. And in 1944, he wanted to go to college and couldn't go to Texas, so he went to Morehouse and went on to become this amazing professor. And that was a loss to the state of Texas in that regard. The chance to educate a mind like that in the state of Texas was lost. So there is a historical piece that we have to acknowledge, and so we've often talked about the importance of acknowledging and understanding that history. Our students tend to be ahistorical sometimes, and history started 5 years before I got here. Not understanding, like, it's not just a matter of will, like, hey, Black people, come to UT. It's like, we need to talk about the fact that how does it feel to be an institution where your grandparents couldn't go to university? When people talk about being a 5th or 6th generation Texan or a 4th generation Longhorn, guess what? None of us are 5th generation Longhorns. Some of us might be 2nd generation, right? but most of us are not. And so I think it's important to understand those pieces. So there is and this is why it's important for every student to understand this, every alumnus, every professor, every staff member, every person involved in the University of Texas to understand this, that we have to change the perceptions of the university. So every time there's an ignorant statement or ignorant behavior, that reinforces what we already knew historically. We'll see, there they go again. And they don't get to see, people don't get to see the day-to-day work I see with students who are working to make this place more inclusive, who are thinking carefully about how history feeds into the present. So having said all that, I think the Texas Advanced Scholarship Program is a real step forward. I've had a chance to travel with the admissions office and talk to people. And actually me going there and telling people, I'm not talking about this place as an abstract concept. I went to school here. I was involved with things here, right? I graduated from here. I can tell you the impact of this university in my life. That's a very different conversation than somebody who sort of, yeah, I work here and it sounds great. And I don't want to diminish people who work here, but having that personal experience and having experienced some of the things that are not pleasant. But I've been to enough predominantly white institutions across this country that I can tell you, UT is not exceptional. Whether in the West Coast, or in the East Coast, or in the South, I've been to those schools, I've worked at those schools, same things are happening there. So I think it's important that we remain engaged. So all of you wonderful, beautiful people who are here with me, when you finish at the University of Texas, I want you to stay connected. And whether that means you come back here and you work here, maybe it means you come back here and talk to students, whatever it means, you need to be connected and make sure your voice is not lost.
It's no secret that, of course, in the next couple of years, some students are going to be taking into the factor campus carry here and whether that makes them want to come to the university. And if UT is already a scary enough place for people of color because of the anecdotes they've heard, now the fact that there's going to be people potentially holding guns on them, many of whom might be, of course, maybe probably white as well, that's just a whole other deterrent. And if we're trying to get that number above 5%, how do y'all think that the university is going to be able to keep students safe or make students even want to come here while that exists? And if they aren't, what are the steps that need to be taken in order to make UT less of a deterrent because of those things?
I think is not nearly as terrifying as open carry, which is going to be enacted in January, right? So campus carry allows institutions to select whatever buildings they want to be no gun zones, right? They can figure out which places they want to not have guns. Open carry, on the other hand, other states that have open carry, big cities can opt out to not have open carry, right? Texas literally decided to not even include that clause. So Austin can't just be like, hey, nah, we don't want it. You know what I mean? Like Houston can't be like, nah, we don't want open carry. And to think that literally cross Guadalupe and, frat packs can be walking around, the same frat packs that wear Confederate flag shorts at every single roundup with their neon green tank tops. Whoever makes these it should be locked up. They could be walking around with guns, you know what I mean? Like just openly, right? Starting January, right? Right in time for the next roundup. I think that is mortifying.
So I'm sorry if anyone wants to explain it to me, please do. It's like beyond me. It's something that I can't begin to process or understand. And I literally can't talk about it because I have no idea how that works.
The second amendment says no guns, right? I mean, so it says guns to everybody because they wanted to protect themselves from the British, right? And I think literally the amendment after that was like no military can be in homes, right?
Yeah. You can't coordinate,
right? So if you put those two together, it'd be like, well, are we still living in the 1700s, fam? Like, are they still coming? You know what I mean? So I mean, it makes no sense. Maybe it was because we're immigrants. No, I was born in the United States. I don't get it.
Pretty consistently, we've seen students, faculty, staff, and not to say that every university feels the same way, but there's been a very strong upswell of folks saying that this is a problematic policy, law. And I think Lloyd kind of pointed to this. It really is almost an invisible thing because my biggest fear, I mean, obviously I'm not looking forward to people packing heat. I'm not looking forward to that. But I'm even more fearful of the chill that it will put on conversations in classrooms. The ability to have difficult conversations or to go there. Like, can I honestly say that I will censor myself when I think about the fact that there could be people in my classroom with guns? I might hold back a little bit. More importantly, somebody made the point earlier about this idea of grade inflation. Now, if the concern is like, my gosh, I have students who are upset when they get certain grades. So maybe I'm not gonna be so concerned about differentiating between a C plus and a B minus, you know? So again, this is going to affect people in ways they haven't thought of, and I think it's really important. The unintended consequences of concealed carry, I think, are gonna be the piece that people are, we hadn't thought about that. We didn't think this was gonna happen. And I'm thinking about the fact, like, from a faculty perspective, you've got a Nobel laureate who can go anywhere in the nation they can go. They got a Berkeley offer, they got a Texas offer, and look at the offers. Well, you know, they got this, they got breakfast tacos in Austin. They also have concealed carry piece. I'm going to Berkeley. And we wouldn't even know necessarily why people aren't coming here. But, you know, will employers want to come here and interview? If you tell executives at Samsung and at Apple, you know, we have a concealed carry policy in this campus, they might say, well, you know, we're not going to come visit you on campus. We'll go elsewhere. So I think that's another concern to think about. So again, not simply this idea that, you know, people have guns and start shooting each other, but just the idea that it will chill a number of things on this campus that are positive and good that affect everybody. And that's what my biggest concern is. I really think, and I've had a chance to talk to people who are pro campus carry, and I think in their minds they've got this idea that this makes complete sense. And I sort of wager this might be the one place in society where we actually, you know, engage in very vociferous ways in disagreement, right? Short of brawling, we get very engaged in the exchange of ideas. That's beautiful. It's great that we can sit here and have a conversation and get a little heated about it. But what do guns do to sort of change that conversation? You either change your tone or you disengage altogether. And I can't think of anything worse of a university where I think what I think, you think what you think, and we never exchange because we're concerned about what might happen if we do.
I 100% don't get it. I guess I just don't understand how
Right. I just want to sound like I need to talk to an NRA member, I guess.
There are a few of those in my family.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, half white, and that half white is very white. No, I just, in interacting with my family, ironically enough, like, or just like the people in the community that I came from, they're like all about open carry, and, you know, talking to, I guess, a lot of people on campus as well that are down with campus carry. It's just like, I don't think that they think about those issues, and that's like one of the problems that I feel like we've talked about a lot thus far, is the fact that we don't, like, lots of people don't understand what it is like to inhabit a body that is consistently criminalized, and like talking about things like that, like how it is really, it's a privilege, you know, if we did have black bodies walk onto this campus carrying guns, what does that look like?
And more importantly, predominantly institutions don't really have structures in place. I think we've talked a lot about structures. This is an institution that was built with absolutely no regard for black, brown, Asian bodies at all, queer bodies at all, right? So we're all here post facto, right, trying to make sense of this experience. When I was in graduate school, I worked with a project called the National Campus Diversity Project. We went to 30 campuses across the country that had been identified by various metrics of schools that had some positive things about campus diversity. So we go to campus to talk to students. Were students like high-fiving us? They're like, no, it's a burden. And one of the most powerful things I heard from a student at Yale was, we are adjunct faculty in the College of Diversity and we're uncompensated. Wow. Because students were coming from school, from class, putting on a Diwali program, you know, by themselves. Yeah, there's a little bit of money going towards what they were doing, but that's what they were doing. And, you know, this student is an engineer, this student is a bio major, so it's not even in your wheelhouse. So I also think about concepts like racial battle fatigue, some of the work that William Smith has done about the assailants, the assault that's done on bodies of color in places like this. And we moved away from the microaggressions literature to racial aggressions, right? I was at a conference last week in Denver, the Association for the Study of Higher Education. The young man who was actually involved in the hunger strike at Missouri is a member of the organization. And, you know, right there we're talking about another college in the Northeast, Boston College, dealing with microaggressions via Yik Yak, which I downloaded recently, and I'm Been very unimpressed, actually. But, you know, that's another place where racial aggressions take place. So there's something to be said about the very real taxation that students, and of course the article I told you about was about faculty and staff, but students experience it too. And I can tell you as a former student, and as a graduate student, I experience it as well. You are responsible for moving the agenda forward. But I do think it's important that we share that struggle, right? Because the struggle, I don't want people to think that, oh, once you graduate and get a degree and become a professor or become an administrator, you're good. You know, when I see these things, I'm hurting too. And it's important that we understand that it's a common experience for all of us. And what's even more tragic for me is the fact that some of the things we were talking about 25 years ago when I started as a freshman here at UT haven't changed. And they haven't changed at a lot of places, right? I think this is a moment for us to really start thinking about the education process for our colleagues who aren't present, right? It's this room, I am fairly certain, is mostly where they need to be or where they need to be going towards. But if we cannot get people who have been divorced completely from the experiences of folks of color in their formative years, in their K-12 experience, in their current experience, to understand why this is important, and quite frankly, see how they're being damaged by this, because they're being damaged. You know, they might not believe it right now, but again, if you have a perspective that you cannot function in a group that's diverse, that's got people with different sexual orientations or identities, you cannot do what it is you want to do. There aren't enough white people to work with anymore, right?
Yes.
So that to me, and I think that's the goal. I mean, how do we engage students who say to themselves, this doesn't affect me, to that very point? Well, actually, this does affect you, and let me tell you why it affects you. That's an important conversation that we need to start having.